Hello and welcome to the Bible study for Sunday, 16th of August. Today's study is on Sarah and Hagar, so returning to the Old Testament. On the surface at least, this study might have some similarities to that of last week's study for Mary and Elizabeth. Certainly, in this case, as with last week's, both characters are bearing children whom God promises will be significant and consequential. But of course, in the case of Hagar and Sarah, they're very different in the detail and the circumstances to that of Mary and Elizabeth. Nevertheless, I think there's a lot we can learn, and certainly it is among the more well-known of certainly the early female characters of the Bible. In broad outline, we have Sarah and Hagar appearing at various times from Genesis 12 right through to Genesis 23. In Genesis 12, we're first introduced to Sarah, and I guess by extension Hagar, although she's not mentioned, where Abraham and Sarah and Lot have moved to Canaan and then moved down to Egypt because of famine. And whilst there, we're told that Abraham feared that Sarah might be in danger, and so he concocts lies about their relationship, lies that Sarah is his sister rather than his wife, because Abram at that stage fears that those in the foreign land may take Sarah and kill him, and that would be that. And as a result of those lies, problems come with the leader in Egypt, Pharaoh, and they're swiftly escorted out of the country through God's providence. In Genesis 16, we're introduced to, I guess, one of the central facts of Sarah's life, that she can bear no children, and so she concocts a plan to have one through her servant Hagar. Hagar, we're told, was a servant that had become hers from Egypt, and this plan was not of God's doing. I think that's quite clear. Nevertheless, she conceives a child, the child who becomes Ishmael, and unsurprisingly, it does not go well in the household. Sarah deals harshly with Hagar, and Hagar flees out of despair. While she flees into the wilderness, an angel from God appears and tells her to return, and actually describes promises that are assigned to the descendants that will come to Ishmael, and giving her, I guess, a semblance of hope, and certainly reflecting Abraham's part in all of this. In Genesis 18, we have the promise that is given to Abraham and to Sarah of the son of Isaac. And as we saw last week, that's with Zechariah, the husband of Elizabeth. In this case, it's Sarah who, and Abraham too, but we see specifically with Sarah that she laughs and she can't believe it. And even when confronted with the fact that she doubted God, she chooses to hide this as well. But clearly having to deal with the hardship and the grief of her childlessness, it must have seen as, and then being in advanced years and far beyond childbearing years, I imagine it would have seemed as some sort of cruel joke to be told or promised such a thing. And then in Genesis 21, Sarah again appears in the narrative, where she does indeed, as per God's promises. Who would have thought, hey? She does indeed conceive and bears the son Isaac. And she has this lovely phrase where she says, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in old age. I don't think these are bitter words. I think these are words of genuine astonishment, gratitude, wonder, exhilaration. I guess, as perhaps might be expected, or nevertheless as it plays out, once Isaac is in the picture and Sarah has her own son, this complicates matters further between her and Ishmael and Hagar. And so Hagar and Ishmael are forced to leave. And this undoubtedly, not unexpectedly, is distressing to Abraham, but God allows it. Isaac is the son of promise, but Ishmael will also be blessed. In verse 16 we have this very unsettling scenario where Hagar has taken Ishmael out into the wilderness, have fled the discord that is there, and the meagre provisions that she had been provided have all been used up, and she can only see death nearby. And God intervenes again in her life and provides for her. And of course, in the immediate sense, they're provided, and as a result, Ishmael and Hagar survive, and then they go on and return, it seems, to the land of her forebears, where she was from, to Egypt, and takes a wife for Ishmael. And so it comes to pass that he is indeed the father of many generations. In a way, it's not too dissimilar, where Isaac was taken to be sacrificed, and there too God provided, and God ensured that what he had promised would come to pass, that lineage would be protected and proliferate. And then in Genesis 23 we have Sarah passing, and Abraham making provisions to provide for her and his family more broadly, but certainly specifically for Sarah, a proper burial. A burial, I think it's fair to say, to give her due honour and respect. And so, what to make of these two characters? What can we learn? It's a good story, yes, but what else? At least a good story in the sense of full of detail, full of intrigue, not necessarily a morally pure or clean and clear example of anything, but nevertheless I think there's some points we can raise. Firstly, to Hagar, the Egyptian maidservant who was acquired by Sarah when she and Abraham and Lot had moved there from Canaan to escape the famine. From all we know in these ancient households, and I suspect to a degree today where this kind of servant relationship exists, the rank of a personal maidservant to the master's wife, it would have reflected honour, obedience, trustworthiness. However, the position stripped Hagar of all personal rights, making her totally subject to Sarah and to her wishes. Because Sarah was without child, Hagar's surrogate maternity was perhaps legal, though it was a clear violation of God's law, and it was also an evidence of a lack of faith on the behalf of Abram and Sarah. Physiologically and emotionally, Hagar changed radically with her pregnancy. Sarah responded to Hagar's pride and self-importance with a vindictive accusation against her husband, who insisted that Sarah assume full responsibility for her maid. Because of Sarah's mistreatment, Hagar ran away. To this fugitive slave, God revealed himself. In tender grace, he met her immediate need and allowed her to experience his presence. Hagar's legacy speaks poignantly to the growing number of disadvantaged and dispossessed women. Under no circumstance can they escape God's watch care. As God provided for Hagar, he can and will provide for every woman. It may not seem so at times in such desperate circumstances, but we know that God plays a long game. The angel of the Lord came to Hagar's aid. He was also involved with Hagar and her son in times of crisis and in times in between. Throughout Hagar's life, it was not easy. She experienced estrangement and prejudice as a foreigner, hardship and abuse as a servant, grief and abandonment as an unwed pregnant mother, and hopeless despair on 2 occasions as she faced imminent death. Yet despite all these difficulties, Hagar responded to the God who addressed her. She did not get compensation from Sarah and Abraham. Her life was never easy. But God did reward her. In the all-seeing God, Hagar found refuge and life. And then to Sarah, we see her appearing in the Bible as it's really a paragon, I guess, of a married woman. 2 notable characteristics mark her life, and we've already made reference to these. And not to treat them glibly at all, but her beauty and her barrenness really do seem to stand as stark contrasts. Because of her beauty, even pagan rulers desired her, yet her infertility caused deep domestic humiliation and even marital dissension. Sarah undoubtedly had beauty, brilliance, creativity, but the quality which implants her in our memories and sets her apart is her unique and unequivocal devotion toward her husband Abraham. She shared not only her husband's challenges and heartaches, but also his dreams and his blessings. She did not waver. She stood by his side through good choices and bad decisions, adversities and blessings, in youth and old age. She's a fine example of a woman who loved her husband unconditionally and tenaciously. You just have to think of all that Abraham went through. Sarah was largely by his side through all of that. Abraham is so often praised, but she too packed up and left her. She too lived this life in the wilderness. She too lived those so many years without child, wondering, I'm sure, at some level about God's promises, God's blessings, the worthiness of all that they were doing. I'm sure such things crept into her mind. More space is devoted to Sarah than to any other woman of the Bible. An entire chapter discusses her death and burial, Genesis 23. Both her husband and son grieved deeply when she died. 2 New Testament citations commend Sarah, Hebrews 11:11 and 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 6. She's mentioned in Romans as well, in Romans 4:19 and Romans 9:9. She's used to illustrate the differences between the bonded and the free in Galatians 4:21 to 31. She's styled as one of the holy women of old because she entrusted to her husband her willing cooperation. From the narrative, it's apparent that Sarah was strong-willed, yet she chose to submit to Abraham, an attitude which God commended. She was consistently identified as Abraham's wife, reinforcing the fact that God viewed the pair as one flesh. Together they were asked to believe that God would indeed give them a son. Sarah is the only wife who's named in what we call the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11. Sarah's mothering experience fluctuated from emotions of skepticism, embarrassment, envy, even cruel recrimination, swinging towards intense exhilaration and joy. Even though Sarah fell into sin, God faithfully kept his promise that she would indeed be a mother of nations. Perhaps as much or even more than any other biblical woman, Sarah stands to teach not just women but all of us, I think, two supreme characteristics of godliness: humble submission to one another in marriage and fervent commitment to nurturing the next generation. Thanks very much.